Hey everybody, it's Brooke with The Buttered Home and welcome to my messy kitchen. We did things a little bit different tonight because there was a slight delay last night. I think it was because I was streaming to 2 different platforms. So we're only streaming to one from now on so that you get the whole video, because I tend to like jump right in and give way too much information at the beginning, and that gets lost whenever the videos post to the timeline. So welcome tonight. We are on day 3, and I can't remember, but I think that possibly I might have said it was day 2 around 4:30 this afternoon, but it's not. It's day 3. I've had a time this week knowing even what day of the week it is. If you can relate, tell me in the comments. And I'm not even retired, so I don't have an excuse other than I think it's leap year. That's what we're going with, that it's leap year. But anyway, we're at day 3. And first before we discard and feed, we're going to look at what our results are. And hopefully your results are similar to mine. So I did switch to the lids because my cheesecloth was starting to stick, and when I pulled it off, it was kind of stringing everywhere. But we have some action going on. We're a little frothy, a little bubbly, but we are not rising. And I don't know about you, but my guys, and these are guys, and we'll get to that in a minute, they stink. Now, do they stink terribly? No, they still have kind of a yeasty smell to them, but they are putting off gases that are not on the pleasant side. So over here we have our starter that we started with the whole wheat flour, and you can still see that the color of it is still a little brown. Now I'm starting this one with the whole wheat flour to build a good firm foundation because that's what I know. I've seen talk where people have started with unbleached all-purpose flour. So jar number 2 here is that test for us to see if the growth is comparable with just plain unbleached all-purpose flour to starting with a whole grain in this wheat flour. But if yours are like mine, they look a little glassy, so they have a little liquid on top. They stink, but like I didn't gag. And if you know me, you know that it's real easy for me to gag, so we're not there yet, but we'll probably get there in the next day or 2. But we do have some activity going on, and this is what you like to see. You like to see that they're growing and moving around. So first things first, we are going to discard half of each. And we'll talk a little bit after we feed, and see, tonight I can pour it because it's a little more liquidy. And then I'm just going to scrape that down and look and make sure. We're going to get rid of just a little bit more because I didn't quite discard half. And we'll talk about why you discard half and at this stage when you're making the starter in just a few minutes. Yeah, these guys smell terrible, but not gag worthy yet. All right, so let's discard our all-purpose jar. Now, last night on day 2, we did feed both with unbleached all-purpose flour because you don't have to continue the whole wheat flour or the rye flour if you're using rye flour. You just want to build a good firm foundation. All right, so we've discarded half of that one. Put my spatula down and let me tie this up, seal it up. And if you were with us last night, you know that I talked to you about investing at the Dollar Tree in a $1 carton of these zip top bags, because this stuff, it stinks. And even when it doesn't stink, it will attract fruit flies. And if you have somebody in your house who tends to the trash like I do, you don't want to make them mad by stinking up the trash. All right, we're going to turn our tap on and get our tepid water going. And in the meantime, I'm going to put the flour in. And again, here on day 3, we're going to feed with unbleached, all-purpose flour. Now, the reason why we use unbleached, I had somebody ask me that today. When flour is bleached, it's bleached, like with chemicals. So you're adding in foreign matter to your starter. And I think I have a question. Go ahead.
Did you use a different spatula or not to clean out the second jar?
Nope, because I'm feeding them the same feed now. I don't really worry about mixing the two. I used the same spatula and just scraped it down really good before I went into the other one. But at this point, really, we just don't have to worry about cross-contaminating them because the whole wheat starter is now going to morph into an all-purpose starter as we continue to feed it with the unbleached plain all-purpose. All right, so how many people actually used the word tepid in a sentence today? So we have our tepid water, and we're going to add just a little to our whole wheat starter. And for right now, I'm going to refer to the whole wheat starter as whole wheat starter because I got a big reveal in just a little bit. Now, you'll notice I did not have to add as much water. The reason being is because it was already pretty wet, right? So we didn't have to add as much water. And that just shows you the difference a day can make. And we probably won't have to add as much over here either. So I'm going to start with just a little, just a splash. And we'll get it mixed up. And mainly you just want to make sure that you don't have any, you see that flour, I hope you can see it, there's dry spots in there. And you can still see flour on the surface of the starter. So we do need just a tiny bit more. Again, if you're just joining us, this is day 3. And we are mixing this and feeding it to a thick pancake type batter. Let me tilt it forward so I try not to get my whole head in the shot. All right, still a little sticky. So just a splash. And the reason why we're not giving you any measurements is because you see, I've just had to add 2 different amounts to 2 starters that we started at the same time. There's no rhyme or reason to it. We're looking for texture and feel. All right, so let me get my spoon. And let's just say, all in all, to both I added probably 1/4 of a cup total. Maybe just between 1/4 and 1/2, because I did fill my measuring cup all the way up to 2 cups, and I only used not quite 2 cups. I mean, 1/2 cup. All right, so this guy, he's good and gloppy and good thick cake batter type consistency. And this guy, same, good and gloppy, good, thick, cake batter type consistency. That's what we want. And the reason why is the water just helps the fermentation process. It does not, you don't want to have too much water in it. So now I'm going to illustrate the finger tight. We get it seated on the threads and we just give it 1/2 a turn. Seated on the threads, 1/2 a turn. And then these guys can be put away. And I'll store them up on my shelf here in just a bit. All right, so we've fed our starter, and there's always lots of questions as to why we discard. And the biggest reason is when we started out probably with roughly anywhere from 1/4 of a cup to 1/2 a cup of flour in each, which equates to somewhere between maybe 20 to 50 grams by weight of flour. There are a few reasons why you don't, why you just don't keep feeding that same amount. And number one is eventually in like less than a week, it would get to be too big and too expensive to feed, because over time the starter does grow. All of that bacteria and the wild yeast goes into there, and it starts to eat the sugars in the flour, and that's what makes the bubbles that we saw, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger. So the number one reason is that it's more sustainable, and you don't have to keep as much to have a fermented and active starter. If you never discarded, then you would have to consistently feed more to adequately feed what is in that you have added and added and added and added. The second reason is that if you don't ever discard, then the chemical reaction that happens whenever the starter starts to ferment and it starts to eat those carbohydrates in the flour and turn into yeast pretty much, or leavening, a leavening agent, can be kind of acidic. So if you've ever eaten real sourdough bread before, you know it has that real sour taste. Well, that comes from the level of acidity that is developed during the fermentation process. So if you never throw that out, then it's going to be way too pungent, way too acidic, and eventually all that acid that builds up in your starter, even just from, birthing it right now, will eventually kill the good bacteria and the good yeast that forms in the starter. Third, there is good and bad bacteria. That's just what I alluded to. So during this process, the discard that we have yesterday was really no more than like a flour slurry. It smelled like flour. It was mainly just flour and water. It had a small amount of fermentation in it, but none really that would actually do anything. If you added it to a recipe, more than likely it would just thicken it and give it kind of a funny, more floury taste. I kind of liken that to making a white gravy. And when you start out with that roux base and you mix up your flour with your butter, you have to let it cook a minute so that it cooks off that flour smell and that flour taste. Well, fermentation is the same thing. It's got to go through all these stages where it turns this raw material into food. And sometimes that sling off of that food is foul. And if yours smells like mine does today, you get that now and you see that. And it doesn't really need to be used for anything other than just discard and making room so that we can feed the good bacteria that's left, so that the good bacteria outweigh those bad bacteria. And it will give off gases and smell. It will give off gases and look kind of funky, and the gases that it gives off will turn to hooch, which is kind of that liquid that we saw. We had a little hooch tonight, but it was clear and it was mostly mixed in. But sometimes it can sit on the top and it smells like acetone or alcohol. And neither one of those smells are a good smell. So you don't want to put that in food, right? Because it's very acidic, and I won't say bad for you, but it's not the greatest for you. Also, by discarding whenever we feed, we are also increasing the strength of our starter. So if we discard half and we feed it brand new fresh flour, then the small amount that's left will gobble it up and become big and strong and be very, very good for what our use is for it, which will be later. So those are just a few reasons as to why we discard. And then later, once you're fully fermented, your discard will be what you cook with. Now, if you don't cook, you can discard, and there are tons of recipes just for the discard. And the reason why there are recipes for discard and not sourdough is because a lot of people don't want to go through the full fermentation process that happens whenever you bake bread. Because when you add that starter to more flour to make bread, it eats and it eats and it gets bigger, and that's what promotes the rise in your bread. It's a beautiful natural thing, and it's just fascinating to me that you feed this and it comes alive, and then whenever you want to make bread with it, it eats again and it causes it to rise and become a beautiful loaf of bread. And then it gives it that really kind of sourdough taste depending on how long you proof the bread. Because the longer the proof time, from 12 to 24 hours, the longer that starter that you mixed in your bread recipe has to consume the flour that's in the recipe and convert it into that fermented dough that gives you that pungent sourdough taste. So a discard amount is a smaller amount that you can use for other things that doesn't have that long ferment time, that will produce a milder product, something that doesn't taste so strong of sourdough. There are tons of recipes out there for just discard, where once you are fully fermented and you feed, what you discard off, 50 to 150 grams, can be used to make something that doesn't have to proof as long. Brownies, cookies, pie crust, cakes, all these different, even crackers. Like this weekend, I'm gonna use a ton of my discard for simple things like that I can cook while I'm home and off work. So that's why I say that this is a really cool project, but if you're short on time, it doesn't mean that you can't develop and grow your own starter, because there are tons of uses that don't require 2 days worth of proofing time for bread. So that's why we talked about going beyond bread last night. And we'll talk more about these things every day. I'm trying not to go very long, so we're going to cover probably about 2 quick topics every night. Like tonight, the other topic I wanted to talk about is the health benefits of sourdough. And I'm not a nutritional expert by any means, but whenever I do something like this, especially that involves cooking, I like to do a lot of research. And I always advise that people do that as well. So it's time well spent because it's interesting. And if you're always learning something, I mean, I think that's just a great thing. But there are tons of health benefits to sourdough. And of course, we'll go into more detail of this at a later date, but by and large, if you proof your sourdough bread, we're just going to talk about in general sourdough bread. If it's proofed adequately, where it goes through anywhere from an 8 to a 24 proofing time, and that's a long time, that's a big investment. I know, you don't have to do it. I'm just giving you some facts. But if you go through that, then that bread ends up being a lower glycemic bread. And what that means is it causes less problems with insulin, or insulin response. So it being low glycemic means that when it hits your system, it doesn't cause your blood sugar to do this. It keeps it kind of stable, because the gluten is a natural gluten, which means that it's not fed by baker's yeast. It is fermented. So anything that's fermented like this, like kefir and yogurt, all these things that go through a fermentation process really are beneficial to your gut biome. And research has shown over the years that gut health equals heart health, equals brain health, equals all of your bodily function health. Everything is tied to your gut. So sourdough, being that it is not born from baker's yeast, also makes it lower in gluten. Now, it's bread, it's made from flour, it's not gluten-free. That's not what I'm saying. And like I said before, disclaimer, I'm not a nutritional expert, but studies have shown that fully fermenting sourdough or fully fermented improved sourdough breads are lower in gluten. And it's because of the complexity of the dough and the fermentation process. And it is not it's not gluten that's derived from baker's yeast. So we talked a little bit last night about the types of sourdough starter, and a Herman starter is actually one that's fed with potato flakes. But when it's born, typically it is made by using baker's yeast. This one is not. This is 2 ingredients. It's flour, it's water. So that's your little health facts. Oh, and it's a good source of fiber. It's a good source of fiber. Anything that's been fermented, like I said, it's all good. It's good for your insides. It's low glycemic, doesn't cause a spike in your blood sugar. It's easier to digest, and it is probably a power superfood in that respect. So if you're sensitive to things that are made with baker's yeast or gluten, you know, and I don't want to say if you're sensitive to gluten to try sourdough bread, because there are different levels of problems with gluten, all the way to celiac disease and beyond. So I'm not promoting that you try sourdough bread, but if you just have a sensitivity to it, it would not hurt to try a bite and just see how it did. But now if you full on have issues, bad issues, you just need to stay away from it altogether, because your health is all that matters. And we always need to put that first. So guys, I am so tickled that you've been here with me tonight. And every night I always fail to mention that if you haven't already, if you're enjoying this and you're new to my page, we have a great website and a VIP email list that you can sign up for. It's absolutely free. You can go to thebutteredhome.com and look for a subscribe option there and sign up for our VIP email list. I really try not to send too many emails. For the last couple of days, I've sent a link to this video in my email, and I made a promise to everybody today that I would stop. So if you're watching, you need to make sure that if you want the videos, that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and that you are following us and have us set to favorites here on Facebook. That's really easy to do. Hit that follow button, then hit it again, and then set us to favorites so that when we go live or post new videos, that we come up automatically in your feed. Now, I guess I don't have any questions. No questions. Yeah. Feel free when we're done. Well, here we go.
Can I use unbleached flour to start?
Well, that's our experiment. I have heard that you can, yes. And that's why I have, oh, and I almost forgot. So the other night I asked for names for and I said they were twins, but where I'm going with this is not twins at all, but it just hit me on the way home from work today. I got home, Big D had a couple of ideas on what we should name them. And I said, okay, well, do you want to hear what I thought of? And he goes, yeah, let's hear it. And I said, okay, and because I liked his suggestions too. So we collectively tried to decide what we were naming them. So the one that I started with wheat flour, well, first, they're Willie and Waylon. So the one that I started with wheat flour is Willie, because he's a little more raw and a little more organic. And then the one that I started with unbleached all-purpose, well, that's Waylon. So I introduce you to Willie and Waylon, and I look forward to adding them to my collection with Phyllis. And Phyllis 2.0 are happily asleep in the fridge, so I didn't even get them out tonight because I'm trying to let them rest. I fed them last night and put them away so that I could bake with them this weekend. But I look forward to y'all following the fermentation journey of Willie and Waylon. But yes, to answer the question, can I use unbleached flour? I have heard you can, and that's why we're doing 2 starters here. Is we are testing that theory, and so far so good. So if you've been on the fence about doing it this way, it's worth a try. I'd say the only decision you have to make is when you're going to start. So that's where we are. But again, make sure that you sign up for our email VIP list. And as always, Big D and I thank you for watching. We love having y'all here with us. And this is going to be so much fun. It's already been a ton of fun. But from Big D and I here at the Buttered Home, we sure love y'all. Bye.